Call came at 6:47 in the morning. A man's voice, unfamiliar, speaking fast. "Mr. Garrett? This is Jim Holloway from Apex Energy Solutions. I'm calling about your mineral rights on the property at County Road 1840. We'd like to discuss a leasing agreement. Are you available to meet this week?" Thomas Garrett set down his coffee. "I don't have mineral rights. Bank told me that land's worthless." There was a pause. "Sir, who told you that?" "First National, 3 months ago, tried to refinance. They said the land had no collateral value, no minerals, no development potential. Appraised it at $1,200 an acre." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Garrett, I'm looking at geological survey data from last month. Your property sits directly above the Woodford Shale Formation. We're prepared to offer you $5,000 an acre just for the drilling rights, plus a 22% royalty on extraction. That's before we even start talking about surface access fees." Thomas didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "I'll call you back." He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes without moving. Thomas Garrett was 71 years old. He had lived on 480 acres in Garvin County, Oklahoma for 43 years. He bought the land in 1983 with money he saved during 2 tours in Vietnam and 6 years working oil rigs in the Gulf afterward. He came back from Southeast Asia in 1971 wanting something no government, no company, and no bad season could ever take from him. His father had rented farmland his entire life in eastern Kansas and died with nothing to leave behind except medical debt. Thomas made a promise to himself in a firebase outside Da Nang that he would never rent, never owe, and never depend on anything he couldn't hold in his own hands. The land he found in Garvin County was cheap because nobody wanted it. Dry, rocky, poor soil, no water rights, no road access except a dirt path that washed out every spring. The previous owner had abandoned it after 2 failed harvest seasons. Thomas paid $47,000 cash for all 480 acres in 1983. He built a house himself over 3 years. He drilled a well. He ran a fence line. He raised cattle when the grass would support it and worked construction jobs in Oklahoma City when it wouldn't. He missed holidays. He missed weddings. He worked every single day for 30 years to keep that land. His wife, Ellen, had managed the money. She kept every receipt, every tax payment, every insurance statement in a wooden file box she bought at a yard sale in 1984. She was careful. She was precise. When Thomas talked about expanding the herd or buying equipment, Ellen would pull out the file box and show him the numbers. Sometimes they could. Sometimes they couldn't. Ellen died in 2022. Stroke. She was 68 years old. Thomas found her on the porch, the file box open beside her, property tax documents spread across the table. She had been reconciling the year's expenses. He buried her on the western edge of the property, under a cottonwood tree she had planted in 1985. After Ellen died, Thomas tried to refinance the land to pay off the remaining balance on a tractor loan. The loan was small, $14,800. But at 71 years old, he wanted it cleared. He went to First National Bank in Pauls Valley in January 2026. He met with a loan officer named Eric Voss. Eric was 38 years old. He had worked at the bank for 6 years. He reviewed Thomas's application for 20 minutes, ordered an appraisal, and called Thomas back 2 weeks later. "Mr. Garrett, the appraisal came back at $576,000 for the full 480 acres. That's $1,200 an acre. Unfortunately, that's not enough equity to justify a refinance at the amount you're requesting. The property has no commercial development potential, no confirmed mineral rights, and limited agricultural value due to soil quality. We're going to have to decline the application." Thomas had asked one question. "What do you mean, no mineral rights?" "The title search shows mineral rights were severed from the surface deed in 1957. They're held by a separate entity. You own the land, but not what's underneath it. That significantly limits the collateral value." Thomas had hung up. He paid off the tractor loan in cash over the next 2 months, pulling from savings Ellen had set aside. He didn't think about the mineral rights again until Jim Holloway called in April. Thomas called Jim back 3 hours later. They met the following Tuesday at a diner in Pauls Valley. Jim was 52 years old. He had worked in petroleum acquisition for 23 years. He brought a folder with geological maps, survey data, and a preliminary lease offer. He spread the maps across the table. Thomas looked at them. The maps showed his property outlined in red, sitting directly above a shaded area labeled Woodford Shale, high-yield formation. Mr. Garrett, your land is sitting on top of one of the richest oil and gas deposits in the state. We've been tracking this formation for 18 months. Initial drilling to the east has confirmed commercial viability. We want to lease your mineral rights for exploration and extraction. Thomas looked at him. Bank told me I don't have mineral rights. Jim frowned. Who told you that? First National. Said they were severed in 1957. Jim pulled another document from the folder. It was a title report, dated March 2026, ordered by Apex Energy Solutions. He slid it across the table. We ran our own title search last month. Mineral rights were severed in 1957, that's correct. But they were reconveyed to the surface owner in 1974 under a quit-claim deed filed with Garvin County. Whoever did your bank's title search either missed it or didn't look past the original severance. You own the minerals, Mr. Garrett. You've owned them since 1983 when you bought the property. Thomas read the document slowly. The quit-claim deed was dated August 12, 1974. It transferred all subsurface mineral rights back to the surface property owner. It had been on file with the county for 52 years. Thomas set the paper down. Why didn't the bank find this? Jim shrugged. Title searches are only as good as the person running them. Sometimes they stop at the first severance and don't check for subsequent reconveyances. Sometimes they don't look at all. Banks don't always care about minerals unless they're planning to claim them as collateral themselves. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "What's the offer?" Jim slid a one-page summary across the table. $5,000 per acre for a 10-year drilling lease. That's $2.4 million up front, plus 22% royalty on all oil and gas extracted during the lease term, plus surface access fees if we need to build roads or install equipment. Depending on yield, total payout over 10 years could exceed $8 million. Thomas looked at the number. He looked at Jim. I need to think about it. Of course, take your time. Thomas went home. He sat at the kitchen table where Ellen used to sit. He opened the wooden file box and pulled out the deed from 1983. He read it carefully. The deed conveyed the surface property and all appurtenances thereto, which included the mineral rights that had been reconveyed in 1974. Ellen would have known that. She always read every document twice. She had kept this deed in the box for 43 years. Thomas drove to Pauls Valley the next morning. He walked into First National Bank and asked to speak with Eric Voss. Eric came out after 15 minutes. They sat in the same office where Thomas had been denied the refinance 3 months earlier. Thomas placed the quit-claim deed on the desk. You told me I didn't have mineral rights. Eric looked at the document. His face changed. He picked it up, read it, set it down. Mr. Garrett, I'm sorry. Our title contractor must have missed this in the search. It's an oversight. An oversight that cost me a refinance. Eric shifted in his chair. I understand your frustration, but the appraisal was based on the information available at the time. If you'd like to reapply now with this documentation, we'd be happy to. I don't need to reapply. Thomas stood. I got a better offer. He walked out. Thomas hired a lawyer the following week. A woman named Patricia Ruiz, 56 years old, practicing oil and gas law in Oklahoma City for 28 years. She reviewed the Apex offer, the quit-claim deed, and the bank's appraisal. Then she made a call to First National's legal department. 3 days later, Thomas received a letter from the bank. It was signed by Roger Killian, Senior Vice President and General Counsel. The letter stated that upon further review, the bank's title search in January 2026 had been incomplete, that the mineral rights quit-claim deed from 1974 had been inadvertently omitted from the appraisal report, and that the property's true market value was substantially higher than initially assessed. The letter offered no apology. It offered no remedy. It simply stated the facts and closed with a generic line about the bank's commitment to accuracy. Patricia read the letter and made another call, this time to Roger Killian directly. She requested a meeting. Roger agreed. The meeting was set for May 14, 2026, at the bank's regional office in Oklahoma City. The room was small, white walls, a long table, no windows. Roger Killian arrived with two associates, both attorneys, both carrying folders. Roger was 61 years old. He had been with First National for 34 years. He wore a dark suit and sat at the head of the table. Patricia sat across from him. Thomas sat beside her. Roger opened the meeting. Ms. Ruiz, Mr. Garrett, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the matter, and while we acknowledge the title search oversight, the bank fulfilled its obligations under the appraisal and loan application process as it stood at the time. There was no intent to defraud or mislead. We're prepared to offer Mr. Garrett a revised refinance package if he wishes to reapply. Patricia did not open her folder. Mr. Killian, your incomplete title search directly resulted in a fraudulent appraisal that undervalued my client's property by approximately $7 million. That appraisal was used to deny him a loan, forcing him to liquidate personal savings to meet financial obligations he could have easily refinanced. You didn't just make a mistake, you cost him money, time, and access to capital based on information you failed to verify. Roger's expression didn't change. Ms. Ruiz, title searches are conducted by third-party contractors. Any error in that process is not the bank's direct liability. We relied on the information provided. Patricia opened her folder. She removed a single document and slid it across the table. It was a contract between First National Bank and the title search company, dated 2019. She pointed to a clause on page 4. Your contract with the title contractor includes an indemnification clause that holds the bank responsible for any damages resulting from incomplete or inaccurate searches performed on the bank's behalf. You're liable, Mr. Killian, not them, you. Roger read the clause. He did not respond immediately. Patricia continued. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to compensate Mr. Garrett for the financial harm caused by your incomplete search. He liquidated $14,800 in savings due to your denial. You're going to return that amount, plus interest, plus $50,000 in damages for the reputational and financial harm caused by an appraisal you now admit was fraudulent. Total, $68,400. You're going to remove the appraisal from his credit file and issue a formal letter of correction to all relevant agencies. And you're going to do it within 10 business days. Roger folded his hands on the table. And if we don't? Then we file a lawsuit for negligent misrepresentation, fraudulent appraisal, and violation of the Oklahoma Consumer Protection Act. We'll subpoena every title search your bank has conducted in the last 5 years and see how many others were incomplete. Discovery alone will cost you more than $68,400. The settlement will cost you significantly more. And the publicity will cost you everything. Roger looked at his associates. Neither said anything. He looked back at Patricia. We'll need to review this with our board. Patricia stood. You have 72 hours. Thomas and Patricia left the building. The settlement check arrived 8 days later, $68,400. A formal letter of correction was sent to the credit agencies. The appraisal was expunged. The matter was closed. Thomas signed the Apex Energy Solutions lease on June 3, 2026. The $2.4 million upfront payment was deposited into an account Ellen had opened in 1987 for land security. Thomas had not touched that account in 39 years. The first royalty payment arrived in August, $47,000 for the first month of extraction. The geologists estimated the well would remain productive for at least 8 years. On a Sunday morning in late June, Thomas drove out to the cottonwood tree where Ellen was buried. His son Michael was visiting from Tulsa. Michael was 44 years old. He had left Oklahoma after college and worked as an engineer in the city. He rarely came back, but he came back that weekend. They walked together across the land without speaking. The grass was tall, the sky was wide and blue. They walked past the fence line Thomas had built in 1984, past the well he had drilled in 1986, past the barn he had framed in 1990. They stopped at the cottonwood tree. Ellen's grave was simple, a stone with her name and years. No other words. Thomas stood there for a while. Michael stood beside him. Neither spoke. Finally, Michael said, "She knew, didn't she?" Thomas nodded. "She kept everything, every deed, every filing, every document. She knew what we had." They stood there a while longer. Then they turned and walked back toward the house, side by side, the land stretching out around them in every direction. Stories like this don't get told enough. People who work their whole lives, who keep the records, who fight quietly and win without headlines. We're making sure they do. Subscribe and we'll make sure you don't miss the next one. Next time, a man named Carl Pritchard, who stood in a county clerk's office for 4 hours and discovered the state had been selling land it didn't own for 30 years. We'll see you there. Paste your script.